Welcome back to Franchisors.com. As I'm sure you guys can all see, we are in a pretty different setting here today. We are in the wine cellar during the Fishman Public Relations summer outing. But luckily enough, we had the opportunity to meet up with I think this is fitting because normally when we're together, we have a drink in our hand, but obviously, of course, we can't really tell everybody that.
No.
I
notice that we don't have drinks in our hand right now.
And it's a step forward, I think. I have Mr. Jeff Wall, the CEO of Handyman Connection, with me today to talk through some things that you guys may be itching to know. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate you having me. You know what the thing is that we can't get to any of this wine, Zach. So that's the challenge. They're all locked up.
They're all locked up, so we're gonna have to find a key. But I think while we're doing that, I think we might as well talk a little bit about how really I know that you got involved in the business in franchising at the very least at a very early age. You were involved with college pro painters for quite a long time. As a matter of fact, in college, so you really got involved in franchising, pretty much before you even had a real career, which I think is amazing. So you definitely have a wealth of knowledge in this space. And one thing that I'm really curious about is that when you are setting up a team, rather if it was at College Pro when you finally got onto the franchisor side, or when you really got involved in Handyman Connection, what is really that first department that you try to build out at the very beginning?
Good question. So I would look and go operations. Mm-hmm. If you're going to bring on franchisees, the question is what are they paying for? How are you going to support them? Mm-hmm. So if you don't have a support team, because the franchisees come with all their knowledge, but then they walk in one day and they go, I don't have any experience in this. What do I do? If you don't have somebody to help them out, teach them what to do, you kind of send them up for failure. So operations support is the first thing that I've looked for and found that to be a big thing in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a common theme on our show. I think that that's a really important thing for people to remember. This isn't on accident, folks. I think that we've had a lot of people who are more important than me who have said that operations is most important, and I think that I personally agree with that as well. One thing transitioning in, because I know that your background is primarily on the sales side. You are a very talkative guy, just like me, so you definitely know how to navigate a room. I think that one thing that is really helpful for people to know is when you're really getting into the saddle and you're really young and trying to figure out what profile makes the most sense for a candidate to be brought in as one of your first franchisees. What do you look for, and what have you learned over the years from people who may not have worked out that some people may be able to take some information from?
So I haven't met the franchise candidate that if you ask them this question, will you do well in this? 100% of them always say yes.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody has belief in themselves and they'll go, look, I'd be great at that. So you learn really quickly. Don't just don't give them the easy question of, hey, will you be good at this? We have used a profiling system, Caliper, for a number of years that profiles their personality preferences and goes, is there a fit? What do they like? Asking interview questions. So we interview all of our franchisees. And when I say we interview our franchisees, we really actually try to do a selection process because you're looking for a long-term fit. I don't want to say it's like a marriage, but you're looking and going, do I see this person being able to be successful, being willing to be with us for a long period of time? And when the stuff's hitting the fan, do they really have what it takes to make sure that they're going forward and continuing on in the business? So we're looking at the profiles of our candidates. Every different franchisor is going to probably have different profiles they look for. Some of the stuff we're looking for, are you more assertive versus aggressive? Mm-hmm. Right? So I try to stay away from passive aggressive people. Mm-hmm. Do you have some leadership? Do you have a willingness to go out there and when times are tough, keep persevering? Mm-hmm. And so there's a couple things that we look for.
Absolutely. And I think that it's helpful to kind of know who your profile is. Right?
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people, are kind of doing it based off feel, but not based off of data. So I think it's a good thing I think it's a good recommendation for people that they actually have some data behind, who they're looking for, right?
What's the old saying in franchising? You'll do whatever it takes to get your first 10 franchisees, and then you'll spend the rest of your career trying to do whatever you can to get rid of those first 10 franchises. Right. Because you just oversold, you overpromised, you gave up the world. So really identifying long-term. Think long-term. Probably my biggest piece of advice is think long-term. It's not about getting the sale today. It's not about getting a franchisee on board today. It's who am I going to want to work with for a long period of time?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, that is one of the things that differentiate you guys from most. I think mostly just because you guys are very much rooted in data, especially when it comes to choosing your franchisees. But I'm sure there's a lot of other things that help you guys differentiate yourself from, the space that you operate in is quite a large one, the home services space. So, talk a little bit about how you guys are differentiating yourselves both on the franchise sales side and, in addition to that, the consumer side as well.
So I really try to look at it as far as the franchise sales side when I'm meeting with all the candidates. And so I'll interview all of the candidates. Our operations team will meet with all the candidates. And I tell all the candidates this: I'm looking for a mutual fit. It's okay if there's not a mutual fit on your end. You're not going to hurt my feelings. And we're going to do the same, because I'm looking and asking this question: are you going to be able and willing to put forth the effort for the long term? Okay. So again, we try to differentiate ourselves by taking a long-term outlook. Another thing we do is I don't sell multi-units. I will only sell single units. In the home services franchise, you don't need multiple units in order to grow your business. So we think that that's actually something that's very, very much for the franchisees. Those are probably a couple of the things that we do differently. I mean, obviously, our business model is different than some other home services franchises. Obviously, we're in the handyman space, so those are a few of the different things we do.
Absolutely, yeah, great. And one thing that I think that you guys, since we did talk about a little bit about how data-driven you guys are, one thing that I know personally just by talking to you offline, but for folks who haven't heard this, I think that unit economics are important to you. I think that the numbers that you have from those unit economics, especially in that item 19 and the FPD, are very important. What are some of the metrics that you guys look at that really help you guys measure how profitable the franchisees are?
So it's a great question. So obviously unit economics drive most franchise systems, right? Everybody's looking at this stuff. Depending on how big you are, unit economics at the huge levels driving stock prices. So we're looking at same-store sales. And we're looking at profitability, average profitability of the franchisees. So for us, we can, our item 19, getting very technical, shows an increase in same-store sales number from last year to this year. We're up again on same-store sales. It's probably the biggest, overall factor. Same-store sales and franchisee profitability. Those are probably the two biggest things that we're looking at.
Awesome, great. So to pivot to something that I know that, again, as we kind of mentioned before, you are quite passionate about it, which is obviously the sales side of things. You are somebody who definitely knows a lot about how to really sell a brand, I think, really well. Obviously, culture is very important to you guys too. Talk a bit about some things, some pitfalls that you guys have seen in your franchise sales process that you've changed over the years that's really helped you guys to be successful. Because I think that rather that could be where the leads are coming from, rather it could be the process itself. There's a lot of things that people do wrong when it comes to sales.
I think especially for all new franchisors, you get into this thing we talked earlier about data analytics and what do you look for and profiling. It's really easy to profile when you have franchisees who are successful in your system and go, great, those are the attributes that seem to be doing well. These are the attributes from some of the poor performers we may want to avoid. When you're first starting off a franchise system, you may not have that, right? So all of us will sit there and at some point, we're all humans, we're going to make errors, and you're going to look across the table. There's something called the halo effect, which is like, boy, this person's like me. I like me, therefore I like this person. They'll be great at this, right? I'm in a different role than running a franchise, right? I don't run an actual franchise, right? I'm a franchisor. So just because somebody may be like me doesn't necessarily mean that they'd be as good on a franchisee level. So I think one of the challenges for new franchisors without the data to be able to sit there and profile somebody is to look across the table and go, boy, this person's anxious to get going. This person is a likable person, and assuming that they'd be really good at running a business. Just because you're likable and you're a great person doesn't mean you're a great franchisee or a great business person. So those are a couple of things.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing to know who's going to fit and who doesn't when you have no data behind it, right? So I think that a certain element, it is a little bit of luck, but I think at the same time, you also have to try and get as many things down on paper when it comes to numbers or, assurances that you can that things are going to go correctly. One thing that you did touch on there that I think is really interesting to dive into, of course, is you talked a bit about, what makes your franchisees successful and what metrics are important. One thing I did want to touch on, is there any secrets that you have in terms of, ensuring that relationship with the franchisees is really going well? Is there any secrets that you have? Kind of the franchisee-franchisor relationship is difficult. So, is there any tidbits that you can share that may be helpful for people?
I think one of the biggest things is when you're meeting a candidate, is try to open up that level of communication. And look, you're in franchising, especially if you meet a great candidate, everybody wants to talk about how great they are. Be honest with people. Let them know the downsides. Let them know the pitfalls. And I'll try to establish that right out of the gate and go like, look, here are some of the challenges you might face in our business. Here are some of the potential pitfalls. Here are some of the things, when the economy is good, these are the things that are really good about our business. When the economy turns, and eventually it's going to turn a little bit, these are the challenges you're going to face, and try to, start off at the beginning of the conversation and go, look, have real conversations with somebody. Don't just give them the rosy colored glasses and give them the world is perfect. It's not all unicorns and rainbows out there.
Sure.
Give them some of the downsides and start establishing that open level communication so that, if something challenging happens, you can always refer back and go like, look, we talked about this at the beginning. And just be honest with people.
Yeah, and I think that again is another recurring thing that I've personally seen when I got started into working with Ryan and all that good stuff. One of the things that I got passionate about was figuring out how brands can really infiltrate the millennial space. And one thing that I can keep hearing time and time again from everybody is that the way that they approach millennials is authenticity. And I think that certainly goes a long way for everybody, but especially for those younger franchisees, which, as millennials become the main contributors to, the GDP, that's really important to do. So, awesome. One thing, because you have been a part of some really awesome cultures, I think that the fact that you started a franchisor the fact that you were involved in a franchisor at a very early age will contribute to this. You've seen a couple corporate cultures over your time. Do you have any strategies for how to really instill culture across the entire network that may be helpful for people? It's a very difficult thing to do when you're establishing a new brand. You don't really know what's going to captivate people. So is there any tips that you have in terms of, ensuring that the culture is consistent across everywhere?
So it's a challenging one because culture is such an important part of all businesses, right? And you can either be intentional about it or not. Regardless, I think every business has a culture. Right? Every community has a culture. Whether or not they were purposeful about that is a different story, right? So if you're not very purposeful about establishing the culture you like, one's going to grow anyways, okay? So again, I'm just going to go back to what we just talked about, which is being upfront and honest and being truthful with people. Set expectations early. Some people when they're talking in franchising, they're like, okay, I'm looking for you to, be my boss. Establishing the culture really early. What's your role going to be as the franchisor? Are you going to try to exert what level of control, right? What level of degree of is that franchise agreement going to come into play?
Sure.
And I think it's really important as far as that, not only from the CEO, but throughout the whole system. You go, what is important to people? What kind of people are you bringing on board to your operations team, to your marketing team, to your brand team, to your technology team? What's important to them? What values do they have? And then how is that going to trickle down to the organization? Because you're going to have a culture whether you want it or not.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. And that's definitely really good advice. So in closing, because I know that obviously we want to get you back to your kiddo because he's hanging out, waiting to hang out with you. But one thing that is there anything that you want to touch on in terms of some things that you've learned over the course of your time in franchising? Is there anything that was like really glaringly bad that you did that people will be able to learn from at all? Just because I think that that's one of the things it's always helpful for people to hear from influential people such as yourself. What you did, because nobody's perfect, and then how you can learn from it.
I would say sit with some really experienced franchise people. And on the franchisor side, and ask them what mistakes they made. Because when you're in franchising, the great thing about franchising is when you're working with franchisees, you're establishing long-term relationships.
Sure.
And you generally have 10 or 20-year franchise agreements. If you're not really good as far as establishing what's in that 10-year or 20-year franchise agreement, you could be challenged.
Yeah.
Because I would ask this question. All right, I'm going to ask you this question.
Sure.
I'll put you on the spot, Zach. It's 2019. Tell me what 2029 looks like.
It's a hard thing to really just subscribe. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know where the economy is going to be. You don't know how technology will change. it's a big investment for sure, and that's what franchising is all about. You have to really figure out a way to navigate the challenges that I don't know what's going to happen 10 years in the future, but you still have to trust me anyways, right?
Right. So what's Google going to be doing in 2020?
We don't know.
What's Amazon going to be
Google
doing?
may not even
right?
be here in 10 years.
Right.
We don't know.
Uber wasn't around or just starting off 10 years ago, right? So you can't even imagine that with driverless car. So you're trying to create an environment, right, where you go, I have a set franchise agreement that's very black and white, right?
Mm-hmm.
And go, how am I going to change or allow the business model to be able to change from a way that I'm currently running a business today? This is how I see the world. These are the important things today.
Mm-hmm.
How can I evolve that franchise and business model 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years from now? What kind of language is important to my franchise agreement? What are the things that are going to be really important? And how's the world going to change?
Sure.
So for anybody establishing a franchise system today or starting off, I would ask this question, okay? How are you going to evolve your system? And how does your relationship with your franchisees, what tools do you have in place to allow you to change ongoing for the way the world's going to change? Because, look, if you were able to tell me what 2029 was going to look like, I'd say, okay,
nobody can.
You and
We have
I
a psychic outside, but I don't know.
You know what I was going to say? We're going to bring that psychic on a road trip to Vegas, and we're going to go. Nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. And so how do you establish a system that you need systems and stuff in place today that's going to be able to evolve down the line? And so there's some stuff you can do and how you set up your system. Technology, I think, is going to be a play in 10 years from now. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what AR or VR is going to look like, but I'm sure it's going to play something in society. Sure. Driverless cars, automation, smart systems. All those things are going to play, and then a whole bunch of stuff we can't even imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, we really appreciate the time, and I think this was really helpful for a lot of people, and looking forward to seeing you at Springboard.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thanks, Zach. Good job.
Cheers.